My name is Vivian. I was the child who had always been hidden, kept out of photos, out of stories, out of the frame entirely, by a family I knew wasn't mine. Callum is my last name. I chose that name myself, the way you choose everything that matters, slowly, deliberately, and with the full knowledge of what you're leaving behind. It means dove. It means one who survives through stillness, not force. I found it on a Tuesday night in the library, 3 weeks before I turned 18 and could legally change my name myself, all on my own. I sat with it for a long time before I decided it was mine. Not because doves are soft, because doves outlast everything. Storms, winters, people who think quiet means weak. Before Callum, I was Vivian Davidson. That was the name on my school records, on my library card, on the one birthday card I ever received, from a teacher who didn't know better. Davidson, a name I was given without ceremony, functional, convenient, nothing that needed to stick. Before Davidson, I don't know what I was called. I have fragments of my biological mother. A face close to mine, brown skin, warm eyes, dangly earrings that caught the light, gold, I think, or something that behaved like gold. A voice with a silvery edge to it. That's all. That's everything. I used to think it wasn't enough. I've since decided it's more than a lot of people get to keep. The day I filed the paperwork to become Vivian Callum, I did not feel sad. I did not feel the particular grief that people expect when you shed a name. What I felt was the stillness of a woman who had lived her entire childhood as someone else's shadow, finally casting one of her own, finally having a name that announced itself without apology. That was the beginning of the end for the Davidsons. They just didn't know it yet. The settlement check arrived on a Thursday. $460,000, back wages, the court called it. Compensation for labor performed by a minor, without consent, without payment, without legal guardianship to authorize the arrangement. 9 years, age 7 to 15. Calculated at the California minimum wage for each of those years, adjusted, compounded, with damages added for the deliberate concealment of my status and the emotional harm documented in testimony. $460,000. I looked at that number for a long time. I didn't cry. I wasn't raised in an environment that encouraged crying, and some habits are hard to break even when you want to. What I did was sit very still at my kitchen table, in my quiet apartment in Jamaica Plain, with a cup of tea that went cold while I stared at the paper. Then I made my bed, washed the mug, and went to work. I want to tell you how I got there. Not the legal route. I'll get to that. I mean the other route, the longer one. The one nobody sees because it happens in back rooms, in school libraries, in borrowed minutes on someone else's computer. Let me take you back to the beginning. I came to the Davidson house when I was about 7 years old. I use the word about because I have no birth certificate, no records, no documentation of the day my life began. What I have is the memory of a face and a voice, and then a long gap, and then harsh voices, and white walls, and a small back room with a single window that faced the neighbor's fence. The Davidsons told anyone who asked that they had adopted me. They said it with a particular kind of warmth, the kind that expects applause. Christian duty, they called it, giving a home to a poor, unwanted orphan. I heard this phrase so many times that I could recite it with their exact intonation, including the slight pause before orphan, as if the word needed room to land. John Davidson was a corporate man, suits, conferences, handshakes that meant something. Amy Davidson ran the women's ministry at their church, taught Sunday school, organized the annual charity drive. She was small and precise, with blonde hair she styled every morning, and a smile she kept ready for public use. They had one biological child, Jenny. She was 2, maybe 3 when I arrived. Pink room, wooden letters spelling her name above the crib, the particular smell of a child who has never wanted for anything. My room did not have letters above the door. In those first months I was taught the washing machine, the dishwasher, the correct way to fold a fitted sheet. I was taught how to make a bed, tight corners, no wrinkles, in a house where I was the only one who made beds. I was taught to clean Jenny's bottles, to heat her food to the right temperature, to change her if Amy was busy. I was 7 years old. I thought this was what children did. I didn't go to school that first year. I didn't know what I was missing because I didn't know what school was. I had fragments, some counting, some letters, from somewhere before the Davidsons. Enough to make me useful, not enough to make me dangerous. Then the neighbor noticed. Her name was Margaret Smith. She lived 3 houses down on the left, a Scottish woman in her 60s who tended her garden with the kind of attention that meant she saw everything that happened on that street. She had a particular habit of being outside at the exact moment that things were about to happen. She noticed that the Davidson girl, the new one, the dark one, was always home, never waiting at the bus stop, never in the carpool line, always visible through the front window or in the backyard, doing something that looked like work. She asked Amy about it one afternoon over the fence. Amy said I was being homeschooled. Within 2 weeks, I was enrolled in public elementary school. I know this because Margaret told me herself, 23 years later, over tea in her kitchen that smelled like some type of vegetable soup and old wood. She told me she'd suspected but hadn't known what to do with the suspicion. She told me she was sorry. I told her the truth, that enrolling me in school was the most important thing anyone had ever done for me, and that she'd done it without knowing. She cried. I held her hand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. School was the word that comes before everything else. It was the air I hadn't known I needed. I was behind in some things and inexplicably ahead in others, and my first-grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Papadopoulos with reading glasses on a beaded chain, told me I was sharp. That was the word she used. Sharp. I turned it over in my mind for weeks. I had never been described as anything before. The routine was this: school until 3, then home, then work until dark. Dishes, laundry, Jenny's dinner, the bathrooms, the kitchen floor. Jenny went to private school, came home to a snack that I prepared, sat in the living room to watch television while I cleaned around her. She was not unkind to me, exactly. She was indifferent in the way children are indifferent to furniture. I was part of the household. I was just the part that moved. I did not tell anyone at school what happened when I got home. I was ashamed in the particular way that is also terror. The understanding that your life is not what lives are supposed to be, combined with the certainty that saying so will make things worse. They had told me this directly. You will get in trouble. We will tell them you were difficult. Nobody will believe you. I believed them because I had no information that suggested otherwise. That information came when I was 11. My elementary school had been all white. Middle school brought black girls for the first time. Chandra, who wore her hair in box braids and had opinions about everything. Alyssa, quieter, with a laugh that started slow and then took over her whole face. I attached myself to them with the particular desperation of someone who has been lonely for so very long. I started to listen. To what their homes sounded like, to what they complained about. Chandra had to do dishes every night. She hated it. Alyssa had to watch her little brother on Fridays. They talked about their mothers the way people talk about weather, present, occasionally inconvenient, fundamentally theirs. I started to understand the shape of the difference between their family and mine. It arrived not in a single moment but in accumulation. The way you understand a room once your eyes adjust to the dark. Nothing new has appeared. You're just finally able to see what was always there. I was doing what Chandra and Alyssa did, except I was doing all of it, all the time. Without the love attached, without a room of my own that wasn't also a storage room, without clothes from anywhere but the Goodwill bins in the church basement. Jenny went to private school. I went to public school. Jenny had horseback riding lessons on Saturday mornings. I had the laundry. Jenny had a birthday party every year, friends, a cake with her name on it. I had the dishes from Jenny's party to wash by 10 o'clock, or there would be a tone in Amy's voice that made the air cold. I felt the shame arrive and settle into me like weather moving in. Ashamed of my life. Ashamed to say a word about it. Ashamed to let Chandra or Alyssa see my house, see my room, see the Goodwill jeans against Jenny's brand new sneakers. I kept my mouth shut. I kept my head down, and I got very, very good at school. I was 14 when I saw the television program. Jenny was watching something in the living room, and I was cleaning her room. the routine the same as always, and the TV was audible from the hallway. A girl. Different situation from mine, but the architecture was recognizable. A bad home, adults who were not protecting her, a body that didn't feel like it belonged to itself. She went to the police. The police came. She was removed. I held that image for weeks. I planned carefully, the way I was learning to plan everything. I used the school computers to find the nearest police station. I timed it, close enough to walk, far enough that I wouldn't be seen leaving. I thought about what I would say. I rehearsed it. I was methodical in the way that children become methodical when they have no one else to do their thinking for them. The officer at the police station who took my case was a heavy-set man named, I read his nameplate, Officer Brannigan. He had the air of someone who had decided before I opened my mouth that my situation was not a situation. He led me to a small room off the main floor. 2 chairs, a table, a window with blinds that were half open. He sat down across from me and took out a notepad, which I took as a good sign. He clicked his pen. He looked at me. "So," he said, "what's going on at home?" I had rehearsed this. I told him the facts in the order I had prepared them, that I had been living with the Davidson family since I was approximately 7 years old, that I had never been formally adopted, that I performed domestic labor in the household, cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare, every day after school and on weekends, without payment and without the choice to refuse. That the biological daughter of the household performed none of these tasks, that my clothes came from Goodwill while hers came from stores I had never been inside. He had stopped writing about 1/3 of the way through. "They have you doing chores," he said. "They have me running the house," I said, "from the time I get home until I go to bed, every day." He nodded slowly, in the way that means the opposite of understanding. "And how old are you?" 14. "Kids do chores," he said. "That's pretty normal." "Jenny doesn't do chores," I said. "Jenny watches television while I clean her room." He set his pen down. That was when I knew. The pen going down was the whole story. "The Davidsons," he said, as though testing the name for weight. "John and Amy Davidson." "Yes. They attend the community church?" I said yes. He sat back. The chair creaked. "I know that family," he said. "Not personally, but they're upstanding people. They're known in this community." He said upstanding the way people say words they've never had to examine. "Taking in a child." And here the pause, the slight recalibration, the look that traveled from my face to somewhere just past it. "That's an act of generosity most people wouldn't manage." "They're not being generous," I said. "They're getting free labor." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I have spent years trying to name. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was the comfortable certainty of a man who has never had reason to doubt the systems that have always worked in his favor. I sat in that plastic chair across from his desk, and I looked at this man and I understood something that took me years to fully articulate. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as it was designed. It was designed to protect people who looked like the Davidsons from people who looked like me. It was not a flaw. It was the architecture. "My advice," he said, picking up his pen and clicking it closed, "is to go home, do your chores, and appreciate what you have." He stood. "A lot of kids don't have anyone." I stood too. I was careful to keep my face still. "Thank you for your time," I said. He walked me back to the front door with his hand loosely at his back, the posture of a man wrapping up a minor inconvenience. At the door he said, almost as an afterthought, "You should be grateful, you know, for everything they've done." I stepped out into the afternoon sun. I did not respond. I had already decided, somewhere between the pen going down and the word upstanding, that this was the last time I would ask anyone in a position of authority to see what was happening to me. If I wanted out, I was going to have to build the door myself. I did not cry. I was past crying about things I couldn't change. What I did instead was file the experience away with the careful precision I had been developing for years, the same precision I used on my schoolwork, the same precision I used when I calculated how many hours I had worked that week. I filed it under, what the system will and will not do. I did not speak to another authority figure about my situation for 9 years, but something had shifted. The shame that used to sit on top of the anger had rearranged itself. The anger was on top now, and underneath the anger, something new, a cold, clear certainty. If no one was coming to save me, I was going to have to be extremely specific about saving myself. I was 14 years old and I made a plan, not a hope, not a wish, a plan, with steps and timelines and contingencies, because I had already learned what happened when you showed up somewhere without them. From 14 to 16, I built a life in the margins. I learned data entry from a tutorial on the school library computer. I taught myself to build basic websites from YouTube videos, watching in 5-minute increments, returning the next day, piecing together the knowledge the way you piece together anything when you can only ever hold a little at a time. I signed up for freelancing platforms and lied about my age, the way necessity has always required a certain flexibility with facts. Chandra's grandmother, Mrs. Ibarra, had a house that needed cleaning. I offered. She paid me $50. I walked to the bank on a Saturday morning and opened an account with that $50, and I stood at the teller's window with the card in my hand and felt something I didn't yet have a name for. I know now it was sovereignty, the particular sensation of a thing that is fully, legally, unassailably yours. I looked at that account balance on the school library computer and I thought, this is the beginning. I saved everything. I earned from freelance data entry, from Chandra's grandmother, eventually from a small pool of neighbors I found through her. I told them I was a high school student earning money for college. This was not a lie. I kept the money in the account and I did not touch it. 2 months before my 16th birthday, I started looking for live-in positions. Caretakers, housekeepers, mother's helpers, the same work I had always done, except this time I would be paid and I would be able to leave. I found Cheryl. She was in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and she was looking for a live-in caretaker. I had already bought a burner phone with cash. I contacted her from the library. She didn't ask for references. My birthday is in July. The Davidsons went to the Cape every July. They had been doing this for as long as I could remember, and this year would be no different. I knew the dates. I had been planning around them for 2 years. The night after they left, I packed what I had into a single backpack. There was not much. Some clothes, the ones that fit, the ones that didn't embarrass me, my school records which I had requested from the office on the grounds that I needed them for a summer program, another necessary flexibility with fax, the cash I'd kept for bus fare and emergencies, the burner phone, and the letter. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten without being invited to eat, where I had stood while Amy reviewed my work, where I had sometimes been too tired to stand, and I wrote it by hand. Dear John and Amy, I have left. Do not try to find me. If you ever try to find my location, I will blast every social media channel. I will speak to newscasters. I will tell my story to every journalist who will listen. This is not an idle threat. What you have done to me was wrong. You know it was wrong. You did it anyway. I didn't sign it. They knew. I left it on the kitchen table. I made the bed in my room. Old habit? And also, I knew it would unsettle them. The maid bed, the absence, the letter. I wanted them to stand in that small room and feel the fact of what they had done. Then I took the bus to Boston. The next 6 years were the hardest of my life. This is a thing I can say plainly now without drama, because it is simply true. Not the hardest because of external violence or catastrophe, though there were close calls, moments where the wrong decision on the wrong night could have changed everything. The hardest because I was entirely alone in them. There was no one checking in, no one to call. Every decision landed only on me, and if I made a bad one, there was no net beneath it. Cheryl, the old lady I was supposed to work for, turned out to be a scammer. She had a house and she had a need and she did not have any intention of paying anyone. I lasted 3 weeks, long enough to understand the situation, short enough not to be trapped by it. I left on a Sunday, quietly, the way I had learned to leave things. I found a family in Quincy through a church bulletin board. The irony of this was not lost on me, who needed a mother's helper and had a spare room. They were decent people, a young couple with a toddler and a travel schedule and no interest in my backstory, as long as the baby was fed and the house was reasonably clean. They paid on time. They left me alone on weekends. They didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. I got my GED at 17. I took the test at a community center in Quincy on a Saturday morning while the couple I worked for thought I was at a library study group. I scored high enough that the woman at the desk looked at me twice. I thanked her and went home and made dinner. Community college came next, Bunker Hill, nights and weekends, stretching a 2-year degree over 3 years because I was also working, always working, the jobs shifting as my skills grew. Data entry became bookkeeping. Bookkeeping became light accounting for a small business whose owner didn't ask about my qualifications because I'd come recommended by a previous employer. I lived in rented rooms, sometimes with a family, sometimes with other students, sometimes in places I don't think back on because they were purely functional. A mattress, a lock on the door, proximity to a bus line. I kept the savings account growing. I kept the grades up. The two things were the same discipline applied to different problems. One winter, a family who had used me for occasional babysitting mentioned that they needed someone to house sit in Nantucket. They were going abroad for 3 months and needed the place looked after, the pipes monitored, the property kept. They offered a small stipend and the house, and I said yes before they finished the sentence. 3 months alone in a house in Nantucket. The first time in my life I had lived entirely alone in a space that was, temporarily and entirely, mine. I would wake in the mornings and make coffee and sit at the kitchen table. A different kitchen table, one without history, one without the weight of all those years of standing, and I would simply exist for a few minutes before the day started. I read books from the house's shelves. I walked on the beach in November when there was no one there. I studied for my college courses at the dining room table with the lights on and music playing, because I could, because there was no one to tell me to be quiet or to stop wasting electricity. So, I had my GED. I enrolled in community college. I took every online job I could find and I stacked the income carefully, the way you stack anything fragile. Attention, patience, no sudden moves. The jobs changed. The studying didn't. I did my undergraduate degree at UMass Boston, political science, because I had been thinking about systems, about the machinery of power, about who builds the structures that make things like my childhood possible. It took me a beat longer than the traditional 4 years because I was working full-time and taking classes and sleeping in borrowed rooms, but I finished, and I finished with a GPA that made the law school application process feel almost easy. Along the way, I collected the things that matter. Not things, actually. People. Junior. I met him in a statistics class at UMass, a skinny white kid from Waltham with a genius for systems and a soft spot for anyone who'd been underestimated by a system. He was the best white hat hacker I'd ever met, which at that point wasn't saying much, but I mean it now with the full weight of experience. He found scholarships I didn't know existed. He had a particular skill for finding things that existed, but had not been advertised to the people who needed them most. I graduated from undergrad with no student loans, because of Junior. Georgie, or actually Georgina was her real name, but she hated it, I took under my wing in a constitutional law seminar where she was clearly brilliant and clearly terrified. Turns out she came from money. Significant money, but you would never know it because Georgie wore it the way some people wear their best quality, quietly, as a form of respect for everyone who had less. She became one of my 2 or 3 people, the kind you call when things go sideways, and Chandra. I had kept in contact with Chandra from back in California, the way you keep contact with the people who were kind to you before you knew kindness was rare. She was in Oakland now, working in social work, which surprised exactly no one who knew her. Law school was also at UMass, the only public law school in the state. I went because it was affordable and because I was not going the corporate route. I went because I had known since I was 14 years old, standing in a police station being told I should be grateful, that the law was a tool and I intended to learn how to use it. I graduated on a Friday in May. It was raining. I stood in the auditorium in a rented gown with Georgie on one side and Junior on the other, and I thought about the kitchen table in the Davidson house and the letter I had left on it. I thought about the police officer who told me to be grateful. I thought about Mrs. Papadopoulos with her reading glasses on a beaded chain, telling a first grader she was sharp, and how I had turned that word over in my mind for weeks because I hadn't had another one. I thought about Nantucket in November, the empty beach, the kitchen table with the lights on. I thought, now. I had 2 goals when I crossed that stage. The first was public and clean, family law, child advocacy, the particular work of being in rooms where the system is deciding what happens to children, and being the person in the room who has been that child. I had already had conversations with a nonprofit legal organization in Boston that did exactly this work. I had an offer. I was starting in September. The second goal I had not told anyone about. Not Junior, not Georgie, not Chandra. Some plans need to stay inside until they're ready, the way certain things need darkness to develop. I had carried this plan for years. I had fed it slowly, the way you feed a fire you're going to need later, and now I had a law degree and a bar license, and an understanding of how systems work that the Davidsons had not accounted for when they decided to use a 7-year-old as unpaid labor. They had made one fundamental error. They had educated me. Not intentionally. They had enrolled me in school because a neighbor scared them. But they had put me in buildings full of teachers who told me I was sharp, and those teachers had no idea what they were setting in motion. I had kept track of the Davidsons, not obsessively. I had a life to build, and obsession is expensive. But I kept a quiet thread on them the way you keep a hand on a wall in a dark hallway, enough to know where they were, enough to know they hadn't moved. Same house in the same neighborhood in Northern California. John still in corporate. Senior vice president of something, LinkedIn profile polished to a shine. Amy now part-time at their church, working in administration, her name on the bulletin in the photos they posted. The church still held its annual women's conference. Amy still spoke at it. I found recordings on the church's YouTube channel going back 8 years. She spoke about service, about sacrifice, about the particular virtue of giving your life to something greater than yourself. I watched every video, I took notes, and then, 14 months after passing the bar, the thing happened that moved the timeline from eventually to now. Jenny posted a photo on Instagram, a family photo, the 3 of them, John and Amy and Jenny, at some kind of charity gala. Jenny looked like Amy now, same blonde precision, same ready smile. The caption read, "So proud of this family and everything we've built together, truly blessed." I was not in the photo. I had never been in any of their photos. I was the thing that happened to them that they didn't post about. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I called Junior. "I need a paper trail," I told him. Everything. Junior didn't ask why. That was one of the things about him. He understood that some requests didn't need context, that the context was already apparent to anyone paying attention. He started with the church. Amy Davidson had been affiliated with the community church for over 25 years. In that time, the church had run multiple charitable funds, a benevolence fund, a missions fund, a family outreach program that, in its earliest incarnation, had included something called the Foster Care Support Ministry. Junior found financial disclosures going back to the church's incorporation. He found a reference in a 2002 newsletter archived on a church history page that nobody had thought to take down, to the Davidsons' wonderful act of Christian service in welcoming a young girl into their home. He found the women's conference programs going back 15 years. Amy Davidson, speaker. Amy Davidson, panelist. Amy Davidson in a 2019 keynote, "The measure of our faith is what we do for those who cannot do for anything themselves." I read that line 3 times. Junior found the corporate records. John Davidson, SVP at a financial services firm that had in their public-facing materials an extensive section on corporate values, integrity, community, service. John was listed on the company's philanthropic committee. His bio mentioned his commitment to family and community leadership. Then he found the financial records that mattered. With my cooperation, working from my own testimony and documentation, he helped me reconstruct the timeline. My arrival in the household at approximately age 7. My departure at 16. 9 years of domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare for Jenny Davidson, performed daily, without payment, without legal guardianship, without consent. Junior helped me calculate the hours. Conservative estimates. We were conservative throughout because we didn't need to exaggerate anything. The truth, plainly documented, was enough. He also found something I hadn't known to look for. In 2001 and 2002, John and Amy Davidson had received payments from the California Department of Social Services under a kinship care program, a program that provided financial support to families who took in children in need of placement. They had received this support for approximately 18 months before it stopped, for reasons the records didn't specify. They had received money from the state to house me. They had pocketed it and put me to work. I sat with that for an evening. Then I added it to the file. Before I moved on the Davidsons, I made one more stop. Margaret Smith still lived next door to the Davidson house. She had lived there for 35 years. She answered the door with the cautious warmth of a woman who opens doors carefully because she has learned that life sometimes rings bells you aren't ready for. I told her who I was. She remembered me immediately. She opened the door and looked at me for a long moment. "Vivian," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Oh, child," in a way that held more apology than most people manage in full sentences. Then she stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." Her kitchen was small and warm, with the particular smell of a house that has been lived in carefully for a long time. Something herby on the stove, old wood, the faint sweetness of shortbread. She moved around it with the efficiency of a woman who knows exactly where everything is and has no patience for anything being otherwise. She set 2 mugs on the table without asking how I took my tea. She'd lived next door to the Davidsons for 30 years. She had opinions about how things should be done. We sat. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me steadily. "I always wondered," she said, "what became of you after you left." "I did well," I said. "Eventually?" She nodded. She heard the eventually. "How long did it take you to get clear of it?" 6 years to get stable." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed. The kettle ticked as it cooled. "I saw things," she said. "I want you to know that first. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I didn't see. I did." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." She set her mug down. "Every morning," she said. "I'd be up early, always have been, can't sleep past 5, never could, and I'd see the kitchen light on in that house. You, moving around in there, making breakfast. I could tell it was you because of your height, and because Amy Davidson didn't set foot in that kitchen until everything was already done." She paused. "You were what, 7? 8? 7 when I arrived." She closed her eyes briefly. I told myself it was just the way some families ran, that maybe it was cultural, or that you were an older child helping out. She opened her eyes. "I knew that wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right, and I told myself it was, because I didn't know what to do with knowing." "What changed?" I asked. "When you asked Amy about school. What made you do that?" "You hadn't been to the bus stop," she said. "Every other child on this street, I knew their schedule. You'd vanished into that house. I'd see you in the yard sometimes, hanging the washing." She stopped. "The washing," she repeated quietly, as if hearing it for the first time. "A child that age, doing the family washing." "All of it," I said. "Every week." She put her hand flat on the table, a Scottish woman's version of composure, pressing something down before it could rise. "I asked Amy because I couldn't not ask anymore. She said homeschooling." Her voice was dry. I didn't believe her. That woman had never struck me as someone with the patience for homeschooling. 2 weeks later, you were at the bus stop. "That's correct." "Did it help?" she asked. "School. Did getting you into school help?" "It saved my life," I said, "in every way that matters." She looked at the table. Her jaw shifted slightly. "And after that, I told myself I'd done what I could, that you were in school, that things must be better, that I should leave well enough alone. She looked up. I didn't leave well enough alone because things were well. I left it alone because looking closer was frightening and I am... She stopped, started again. I was a coward about it. I'm not going to dress that up. You weren't the system, I said. You weren't the police, or the school, or the church. You were a neighbor. I was an adult, she said, and you were a child. That's the only thing that matters. We sat with that for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, Margaret's garden was doing its patient-ordered work in the afternoon light. What do you need from me? She said. Tell me what you need and I'll do it. A written statement, I said. What you saw, when you saw it, as specifically as you can remember. Dates where you have them, a description of the pattern. I kept a diary, she said. I looked at her. 40 years, she said matter-of-factly. I write every evening. It's a habit. She got up and went to the drawer beside the refrigerator and came back with a small stack of notebooks, rubber banded together, the covers soft with age. I can tell you the exact date I noticed you weren't going to school. I can tell you the date Amy told me about the homeschooling. I can tell you the first morning I saw the kitchen light on at 5:45 a.m. She set the notebooks on the table between us. Will that do? I looked at those notebooks for a long moment. Margaret, I said, that will do perfectly. She nodded once, briskly, the way you nod when something has been decided and there's no point in making more of it than it is. Then she got up to refill the kettle, because we were going to be here a while, and there was work to do. She had seen and she had not acted, and this sat on her like a stone. She had not made excuses. She was ready to act now. Waive one of my revenge plan. The church. I drafted the complaint myself. I was, after all, a lawyer. It was 6 pages, single-spaced, attached to 40 pages of exhibits. The exhibits included my testimony, Margaret's statement, the church newsletter from 2002, Amy Davidson's conference recordings with the relevant passages flagged, financial records showing the state payments, and a detailed timeline of the labor I had performed in the Davidson household from age 7 to 15. I submitted it formally to the Governing Board of Community Church. I included a cover letter explaining that I was giving the board 30 days to respond before I took further action. The board did not respond in 30 days. On day 31, I submitted a request to speak at the next open board meeting. Under the church's own bylaws, which Junior had found on their website, any member of the community could request to address the board on matters of church conduct. I was not a member, but I was a lawyer, and the bylaw said community member, and I lived in California for the first 15 years of my life, which was community enough. They seated me at the end of the table on a Thursday evening in October. There were 12 board members. Amy Davidson was not present. She had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the complaint. She knew I was coming. She had sent a message through Jenny, who had sent a text to a number that went unanswered. I read my statement. 8 minutes. I did not raise my voice. I did not editorialize. I listed facts in chronological order and let them sit in the fluorescent-lit room like furniture that had always been there and was only now being seen. When I finished, the room was very quiet. The chair of the board, a man in his 60s named Pastor Gerald Hicks, looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "We were not aware of this situation." I said, "I know." I gathered my papers. I thanked them for their time. I walked out into the parking lot where the October air was cool and thin, and I sat in my rental car for a moment before I started the engine. Wave 1 had landed. The church placed Amy Davidson on indefinite administrative leave within a week of the board meeting. Within 2 weeks, someone on the board, I have my suspicions but no proof, had spoken to someone who knew someone, and a local California news outlet ran a brief item. Long-standing church employee placed on leave amid complaint of child labor abuse. It was 4 sentences. It was enough. Wave 2, the corporation. John Davidson's employer had an ethics hotline. I know because I had spent an afternoon with their corporate responsibility report, a glossy document full of commitments to integrity and community and the dignity of all people. The hotline number was on page 42. I called it, I gave my name, I was transferred twice and then connected with someone in HR compliance who took my information in the careful, neutral tone of someone who understood immediately that this was not a routine call. I followed up in writing. I sent the same file I had sent to the church, minus the church-specific exhibits, plus a copy of the news item, plus a letter from my attorney, which is to say, from me, on my own letterhead, detailing the facts and their relevance to John Davidson's public position as a representative of corporate values. John Davidson was called into an HR meeting on a Tuesday morning. I know this because Georgie, who had a contact at the firm, Georgie knows everyone, it is her particular superpower, sent me a text that said simply, Tuesday 9 a.m. His assistant looked stressed. I was in court supporting another child victim on Tuesday morning. I got the text during a recess. I read it twice, put my phone in my bag, and went back in. The essay that detailed everything I had always wanted to say took 3 weeks to write. Not because I didn't know what to say, I had been carrying this story for 20 years and I knew every word of it, but because I wanted it to be exactly right, not angry, not performative, not asking for sympathy, just true. I titled it The Help They Made Me. I wrote it in first person, present tense for the childhood sections, past tense for the retrospective. I used our real names. I submitted it to a national publication with a significant digital footprint and a history of publishing first-person accounts of systemic injustice. They ran it on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it had 40,000 shares. By Thursday morning, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets and a podcast with 2 million listeners. The church statement, which they had released the previous week, expressing deep concern and a commitment to investigating all matters brought to their attention, was suddenly being read alongside my account of Amy Davidson's keynote speech, with the relevant passage excerpted, "The measure of our faith is what we do for those who cannot do for anything themselves." The gap between what she had said and what she had done was visible to everyone now. It required no comment. It stood on its own. The civil case had been running parallel to all of this, quiet and procedural, the way legal processes run. I had filed in California. I had named John and Amy Davidson. The claim was unpaid wages for domestic labor performed by a minor, aggravated by the unlawful receipt of state funds intended for my care. Their attorney reached out 2 weeks after the essay ran. Settlement discussions are confidential. I will tell you only this. The number that was eventually agreed upon was $460,000. I will also tell you that my attorney, not me, I had retained separate representation to avoid the appearance of conflict, had made clear from the beginning that we were prepared to go to trial, that we had documentation, that we had a witness, that we had, thanks to Junior, a financial record that showed exactly where the state's money had gone. They paid. They signed the confidentiality agreement about the settlement amount, not about the existence of the settlement. I had refused that clause, and they had eventually agreed. The existence of the settlement was public. The Davidsons had paid. That was public. That was the point. I am standing in my apartment in Jamaica Plain on a Thursday morning, and the check cleared yesterday, and the essay is still circulating, and Amy Davidson has officially resigned from her church position, and John Davidson's LinkedIn profile no longer mentions his philanthropic work. I made my bed this morning. I do this every day. Old habit, except now it is not a habit born of fear but a choice. Mine. Like everything in this apartment, like every object and every morning and every cup of tea I make in a kitchen that belongs to me. Chandra called last night. She cried a little. I let her. She said, "I always knew you were going to do something like this," and I said, "I didn't, for a long time." She said, "I know. That's what makes it better." Junior texted, "Callum," just that, all caps. I sent back a dove emoji, which is the most sentimental I have ever been in my adult life, and I stand by it. Georgie is flying in next weekend. We are going to eat an expensive dinner. the kind I couldn't afford for most of my life, and she is going to make me order dessert, even though I'll say I don't want any. I'll order it. I always do when she asks. I think about Margaret Smith sometimes, the woman who looked through a window and saw a child doing work she wasn't supposed to be doing, and who found a way, imperfect, limited, the best she could do with what she had, to do something about it. She sent me a card after the essay ran. The card had doves on it. She didn't know. Or maybe she did. I think about the police officer who told me to be grateful. I don't know his name. I never learned it. I used to think about him with the particular fury that lives in the stomach, and now I think about him with something cooler and more durable. He was one data point in a system that wasn't built to see me. I spent 20 years learning how to make that system see me whether it wanted to or not. I think I have made my point. I think about Amy Davidson, sometimes, not often. I think about the gap between who she performed being and who she actually was, and the particular tragedy of spending a life that far inside your own lie. She had a platform. She had a congregation. She had a microphone and a record of being believed, and she used all of it to construct a version of herself that required my silence to survive. She had 30 years. I only needed one. I think about the word grateful. I think about how often it was weaponized against me. Be grateful, you could be on the street. Be grateful, we took you in. Be grateful, be grateful, be grateful. And I think about the fact that I am, actually, grateful. Not to them, never to them, but grateful in the way that a person who has built something from nothing is grateful, not for the nothing, but for the knowing. I know what I am made of. I know exactly how much I can carry, and for how long and what I can do when I put it down. They thought they were keeping me in place. They were teaching me how to endure. The difference between what they intended and what actually happened is the whole story. It is the only part of the story that made any of this worth writing down. My name is Vivian Callum. I chose it, I earned it, I signed it at the bottom of a check for $460,000, and I am not done yet. Not done with the work, not done with the children who are where I was, not done with the systems that make it possible for a 7-year-old to disappear into a house and not come out for 9 years. But today I am done with the Davidsons. I didn't burn the house down. I just made sure everyone knew exactly what had been built inside it. And I made my bed this morning. Mine. This story was inspired by a true story. I have changed many of the details, but one thing should be clear. In the United States, tens of thousands of people, many of them children, are being forced to do unpaid labor. If you see something, please say something. If you enjoyed or learned something from this story, please like and subscribe.